All right, so today we're going to be talking about the prevalence of HIV/AIDS in Europe. A little background information on AIDS. AIDS stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. AIDS is the most advanced stage of an infection resulting from HIV, which is known as Human Immunodeficiency Syndrome. HIV is most commonly transmitted through blood or semen. Most cases are the result of sharing a drug needle or having sexual relationships with someone infected with HIV. HIV attacks and destroys the vital infection cells of the immune system called CD4 cells. The loss of these cells weakens the immune system and is responsible for causing AIDS and makes it extremely hard for the body to fight off infections and cancers. A good example I like to bring up is Dallas Buyers Club. If you've ever seen that movie, Matthew McConaughey, the actor, he struggles very hard with AIDS, and you kind of see him at the beginning of the movie. When he first acquires HIV, he really looks sick and weak, and his body's just fighting off a ton of infections. He's coughing a lot, and this is what the virus does. It breaks down a lot of the white blood cells in your immune system, CD4 cells in your immune system, and kind of attacks your immune system and weakens your body as a whole. This is HIV and AIDS specific to Europe. In 2011, there were over 10,000 new cases of AIDS in Europe. Notoriously, Ukraine, Estonia, Portugal, and Latvia hold the highest number of citizens living with HIV. In Europe, similar to the rest of the modern country or modern world, the transmission of HIV is among a wide range of activities, including some of the things I just said, but not. I didn't mention paid sex, sex between men, and mother-to-child transmission. The mother-to-child transmission is a lot less common, but does happen. However, recently in Western Europe, the transmission has been found through infected individuals not of that region, which doesn't really have anything to do with my research specifically, but I just found that interesting when I was going through the background of AIDS, that a lot of some of this data of people becoming and contracting AIDS is, from someone of not that region. So just a little interesting. Treatment of AIDS. Sadly, AIDS is incurable, and there is only treatment to lessen the conditions of a weak immune system. The treatment is called antiretroviral therapy. ART is for short of that, and consists of antiretroviral medications and vitamins to support the immune system. While ART cannot cure an individual, it can substantially increase an individual's health and life expectancy. ART yearly costs are estimated at 21,000 euros, and a lifetime of buying ART is averaged around 357,000 euros, which is obviously an insane amount of money. Research question I'm going to be asking is, does the number of contractions of HIV/AIDS directly correlate with the number of deaths in Europe? Or are the numbers of deaths due to HIV/AIDS the result of an extraneous variable? My hypothesis is that HIV/AIDS contractions will not directly correlate with the amount of deaths, and the amount of deaths may be influenced by amount of contractions and extraneous variables, meaning that the deaths aren't directly 100% due to contraction. The deaths might be due to an extraneous variable such as money or like education on prevention of AIDS and things like that. The extraneous variable I will be considering in this research is going to be the average income of country X in Europe. While there are many other extraneous variables, including drug use, education, etc., due to the overwhelming cost of ART, income is one of the most important factors for fighting the effects of AIDS, the symptoms of AIDS. So income will be the only extraneous variable I will be considering in this experiment for time and for simplicity. This is the breakdown. We have HIV/AIDS contraction in Europe, which is one of my maps, and then HIV deaths, which is one of my other maps. And we know that those are going to be correlated. It's kind of a common sense thing. But Average income is going to be the extraneous variable here. And we know that HIV will affect average income, obviously, because it costs a lot to fight AIDS. And what we're wondering here is, will average income and HIV deaths be affecting one another as well? First, so let's take a look at the HIV/AIDS contraction map for Europe. We have Europe as a whole here. It looks pretty healthy as compared to the United States or any other modern place. It's pretty normal as far as this square right here. We have Switzerland, obviously a huge outlier there in the middle of Europe. I don't know what problem they're having, but that is a little ridiculous to be that high as compared to everyone else around you. We're going to look at some of the good countries first as opposed to hopping straight into the bad ones. Norway is in the red. As you can see, that's 0 to 0.25 LQ. 1 being, the European norm, so 0 to 0.25 is, you're looking really good. We got Norway, Germany, Belgium, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Albania, Macedonia. These are all countries that are looking very healthy as far as the prevention of HIV in their citizens. Here we'll continue. So let's talk about the East. As you can see, the East having a little bit of green over here. Purple, this isn't going to be that great. We even got a little bit of light blue up here. So these being the three worst colors as far as LQ is considered. Kind of sad. I don't know what epidemic they're having over there, but the transmission and the contraction of AIDS is definitely worrisome, especially in Ukraine. Also, we have Switzerland over here. We're going to pop that guy up. Moldova also not looking too healthy as far as the contraction of AIDS. Pretty sad to see their levels almost 3 to 7 times higher than everywhere else in Europe. So now we're going to talk about Lativa. Also not the greatest condition right now in the 2.1 to 3.0 LQ. Belarus, also not in that great a position, purple, and also on the eastern side of Europe, which is kind of makes you wonder what's going on over there. Now that we have some general ideas of the prevalence of HIV and AIDS contraction in Europe, let's take a look at the HIV/AIDS caused deaths. When we're talking about deaths, you're mainly going to be talking about AIDS, since AIDS is really HIV just progressed. It's like the most advanced stage of HIV. So when you're talking about deaths due to HIV, you're almost always talking about AIDS. I like to start out with the good, so let's hop into that. You have Finland looking really well, Lithuania as well here, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Ireland, Germany. Germany at 0, if you notice that, 0 deaths. This was for the year, my data was from 2011. So that's pretty incredible. As far as an LQ, that doesn't mean necessarily there are 0 deaths. Czech Republic, looking really good. Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia. Bosnia also at 0 LQ right there, which is pretty amazing. Some of these LQs can be off just because of population. I mean, if you have a lower amount of population, you're also going to have a lower amount of deaths. So when you compare that to the rest of Europe, shouldn't matter too much. But okay, moving on. The bad. All right, here we go. Lativa again on the bad list, which is not good. Switzerland again on the bad list, and then Moldova, which Moldova was also not that great from the start. So those countries really showing a correlation between contraction and deaths. Now we're going to dive into some of the key differences between the maps. When observing the maps, we find differences in countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, and Czech Republic. So let's take a closer look at these countries specifically. We have a little chart I made here. We're going after the extraneous variables in this portion of the PowerPoint here. So we're looking at Netherlands. You have a income of 25,000 euros, around there. Denmark, same 25,000. In Czech Republic, you're looking at an income of 12,000. And this is a yearly average income. A lot of these countries, there's rich and there's poor, but this is just, I went online and just found what I could do for median people, middle class, average income. So, because that's who I expect to be struggling with some of these, with HIV/AIDS. So we're going to take a look at Czech Republic specifically, because it is one of the best out of this entire maps that I did. It's one of the best at showing the difference between contraction and deaths. For contraction, we were at a 1.57 LQ, which is a little bit higher than the norm of Europe. And I think when you're looking at Europe as a whole, Eastern Europe really puts a dent in the rest of Europe. Some of these countries are still having problems with HIVs. Like the UK, France, Spain, and they don't look too high just because Eastern Europe is kicking up such high numbers. So when you consider Europe as a whole, it makes some of these other countries look better when still they're struggling with HIV/AIDS just as much as some parts of the United States are. But that's, as in any average you do, that's likely. So Czech Republic specifically, a 1.57 LQ. And then when we look at the deaths in Europe, they're at a 0.17 LQ, substantially lower than the rest of Europe. And I mean, it's along there with a lot of Europe, but substantially lower than when you compare it to the contraction rate. So let's continue. These are some of the findings I had while making these maps. I said, well, this is not scientific evidence. There is an amount of undeniability in these numbers. Although Czech Republic average citizen makes considerably less than Denmark or the Netherlands citizen, also you got to keep in mind inflation rates there, because that's pretty important, especially with a country like the Netherlands. But for the recorded year of 2011, AIDS deaths, Czech Republic reported a 0.17 LQ, which we just discussed, meaning many citizens living with HIV/AIDS continued to live, while their contraction rate is on the higher end compared to the rest of Europe. Meaning a lot of those people that they're getting a lot of numbers of AIDS, HIV, AIDS. A lot of people are going to the hospital and, showing symptoms and contracting HIV, but they have a substantially lower amount of deaths. And this is rather solid information leaning towards extraneous variables not hindering the life of an individual with HIV/AIDS as much as one might think. One, including myself, when I started this experiment, I thought average income would have a ginormous effect on life expectancy. Whether that could be because I'm American and we don't have the health insurance that some of these European countries do, and that pretty much AIDS in America is a self-fighting battle. So you have to come up with the money a lot of the times, and maybe in these European countries they're not as liable for as much, but there's still got to be. You're still fighting AIDS. It's still pricey. So that was just surprising to me. Well, it is important to remember that there are more extraneous variables than average income, as I stated, like government assistance and healthcare programs sponsored by independent networks, specifically for the treatment of AIDS. We should keep in mind that these drugs are not cheap, even when subsidized. So money is still very important and should still be considered. Just because my research didn't find it, I think it's still something that when you're talking about AIDS or fighting any infection, cancers, anything, you need to consider money Back to the research question. Does the number of contractions of HIV/AIDS directly correlate with the number of deaths in Europe, or are the numbers of deaths due to HIV/AIDS the result of an extraneous variable? I found specifically that there are strong correlations with HIV contractions and AIDS deaths. As you would expect, I mean, obviously, if you're getting a large number of contractions, you're going to get a large number of deaths, as people don't tend to leave their home countries, or don't tend to have money to leave their own countries. But rather interesting, we found little evidence for extraneous variables of money to be a monumental resource for preventing contraction or death from HIV/AIDS. So yeah, that was just one of the main findings I found was specifically to Czech Republic, being much lower income at $14,000 than, let's say, the Netherlands, that they also were kicking out extremely low numbers of AIDS deaths. So, pretty interesting. Conclusion, although my experiment showed little evidence, it doesn't mean that there aren't other extraneous variables affecting the death rate of individuals living with HIV/AIDS. Many things can prolong or decrease an individual's life suffering from HIV/AIDS. But we can, with strong evidence, conclude that contracting AIDS does correlate to the number of AIDS caused deaths. But in some cases, certain countries like Czech Republic are experiencing a substantially lower amount of AIDS deaths than others contracting HIV/AIDS at around the same LQ. I think this poses a pretty important question. Why is this? While I don't think it's an undergraduate as myself to go and find why countries like Czech Republic are cranking out the same numbers as Denmark and Netherlands as far as AIDS deaths, as low as numbers as far as AIDS deaths. I do think it's necessary to have further research on the topic so the rest of the world can know, what they're doing. Are they having certain health programs that are working? Are they being very active about it as a country as a whole, fighting AIDS and prolonging the life of individuals with AIDS? So that's just an interesting question and should definitely get some further research by maybe some scientists somewhere.